This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Marc Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. What the hell is going on? Mark, tick, tick, boom.
What the hell is going on is Israel and Kamala Harris have finally found an issue on which they agree 100%. They both support government-funded gender reassignment surgery.
Mark, you've been holding on to that baby for a while.
I have. The Israelis have carried out the most exquisite, the most discreet, the most effective counterterrorism operation possibly ever. This thing is amazing. You know, they somehow inserted themselves into the supply chain and sold Hezbollah thousands of pagers that they had rigged with explosives and then set them off simultaneously, thousands of them going off, blowing up Hezbollah operatives all across Lebanon in a single moment. We've all seen the videos of some of these guys writhing on the floor, and it makes my heart sing. You know, and I will tell you, and I'm sorry, maybe that's a little bit gruesome, but I will tell you, Israel has been attacked over and over. And I saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez condemning this, you know, and I was like, you know, what exactly do you want Israel to do? Because you criticize Israel for, you know, Hamas hides behind civilians. And then you criticize them for using bombs in civilian areas and civilians being killed as collateral damage. Here you have an operation that was so discreet. There's nobody in Lebanon who's not a terrorist who's using a pager. This was, and certainly not from the supply that was provided by the Israelis to Hezbollah. Everyone, with the exception of perhaps some people who were bystanders, but not very many, every person who was hit by this was a terrorist. This was so precise, so targeted, and so effective. And they're condemning this too, because you know what? They don't want Israel to respond. They hate the Jews. They don't want Israel to be able to defend itself. It's all a big lie. And here you have one of the most unbelievable, you know, Hollywood-style operations that will one day be made into a movie, and I can't wait to see it.
And I can't wait to see it.
But you know, Israel can't win.
You missed the other outstanding people who condemned this. So first of all, I want to underscore, you mentioned that AOC condemned this, but what you didn't mention is this is the first thing she said about Hezbollah. In other words, she hasn't condemned the thousands of rockets that have now rained down on northern Israel. That she didn't condemn the murder of the children in Majd al-Shams, but this she condemned. That's number one. Number two, guess who else is on that hit parade? I put it on the Substack because I couldn't believe it as a little PS. Rashda Tlaib rages against Hezbollah pager memes. That was number one. And the other one, of course, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who truly is a bad person. These guys have no understanding of what the difference is between murdering a bunch of children playing soccer in northern Israel, Muslim children, Druze children, and exploding the front pocket of a couple thousand Hezbollahis, all of whom took those pagers because they are members of Hezbollah. And if any one of their children was playing with it, as the Lebanese have claimed, shame on them, right? Shame on them, period, end of story, right? Your daddy wouldn't have had that beeper if your daddy wasn't a terrorist, right? But Mark, I want to talk about just quickly before we go to our really, really fun conversation with Marc Polymeropoulos. This has been a very impressive operation, and he really goes into the detail about just sort of how jaw-droppingly impressive it was. from soup to nuts, because this was not something they like figured out. It wasn't like Tom Cruise, what should I do? Yes, I'm going to break into the CIA. It'll take me about 20 minutes to plan it, and it'll all be awesome, and I'll steal the knock list. If anybody remembers, that was the first Mission Impossible. Great movie. It wasn't like that. They've been planning this for a year. But think about the other operations that they've conducted this year. They took out Fuad Shukr. Fuad Shukr had a $5 million State Department reward for information on his head. He was one of the central planners and the right-hand man to Hassan Nasrallah, central planners of the 1983 Marine barracks bombing, in which we lost more than 200 Marines. The French lost more than 50 soldiers in that bombing as well. And in addition, obviously, he's been an architect of a lot of the attacks on Israel that Hezbollah has undertaken. He was so paranoid, like everybody at the top of Hezbollah, that he lived and worked in the same building, right? So his office was on the 3rd floor. His home was on the 7th floor. That way he didn't have to go out in a car and look like Ayatollah Khamenei up at the sky to see whether someone was coming to get him, which was smart on his part. But in addition, Hezbollah has been slowly peeling back the onion of communications, right? So they're very nervous about cell phones, so they got those beepers. But prior to that, they had created a closed cell phone network in which only they could talk to each other, right? And that was smart on their part, because that kept out listeners, that kept out the Israelis. They thought, Fuad Shukr got a phone call when he was sitting in his office on the 3rd floor. He got a phone call from somebody who he trusted enough on that phone network, who called him and asked him to come upstairs to his apartment. And that call was so persuasive that he went up there, and then, boom, they took him out with a missile. Okay, that's that operation. Then we've talked about the operation that took out the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in an IRGC building, which is even more shocking. But what people don't remember necessarily, and you may remember me talking about this, is the almost fictional sounding account of how they took out the head of Iran's nuclear program. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so how did they take him out? With a smuggled in satellite-controlled machine gun that shot him in his car and left his wife fine next to him.
And in a traffic circle, right?
Right, in a traffic circle. And then the gun self-destructed.
It is remarkable. The Israelis are so good, so spectacular, and I just love this. Here's what we're going to do for you: is what we've done is we've gone to our friend Marc Polymeropoulos, who is responsible for these kinds of what he calls denied area kinetic operations for the CIA. He says that all of his colleagues agree that this is the most exquisite denied area kinetic operation they've ever seen. Marc is someone who knows the tradecraft of this, and so he is going to walk us through how the Israelis. He doesn't have access to intelligence. This is just him from his knowledge of how these things happen and watching open sources. How he thinks they pulled this off and why it's so spectacular. So this is a conversation you do not want to miss.
And everybody remembers Marc. We've had him on before. Marc Polymeropoulos is a non-resident senior fellow in the forward defense practice of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. He spent 26 years at the Central Intelligence Agency before retiring in 2019 at the SIS level, that's Senior Intelligence Service. He was one of the CIA's most highly decorated operations officers. For those of you who don't watch TV, Operations is the Spies. And he is the author of Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA.
Here's our interview. Marc, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. Great to be with y'all.
You had a tweet that said, "This is the most impressive denied area kinetic op I have witnessed in my career." You've witnessed a lot of denied area kinetic ops. Tell us why you said that.
So let me say just from the outset, I canvassed. This is just not me. I canvassed nearly all of my other retired colleagues, and they had the same reaction. Now, some of them kind of, we have kind of our own friendly rivalries with Mossad. We've worked with them very closely. So, we don't always want to give too much credit to other intelligence services, but everyone stepped back on this and we were like, whoa, that was unbelievable. And I worked with the Israelis for years and years. And let's go back to, and of course, I've been in liaison contact with them. Go back to 1996 when they killed Yahya Ayash, a master Hamas bomb maker, with the cell phone that exploded. Really extraordinary op. And even let's fast forward now to July when they killed Fuad Shukr in Beirut. Incidentally, something we should all celebrate because Fuad Shukr was responsible for the deaths of 241 U.S. servicemen and women at the Marine barracks bombing in the early 80s. And then, of course, they killed Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. But these are one-off high-value target strikes. And that's what the Israelis kind of wrote the playbook. We got good at it too. That's find, fix, and finish missions, single individuals taken off. The scale of this was staggering. It was absolutely staggering. And, the idea of being able to, it's not a decapitation strike, it's an incapacitation strike that they took out. We don't even know the figures. It could be several hundred, 1,000 Hezbollah members, and clearly many of them operatives. And don't forget, a pager is given to a Hezbollah member. This is not just cell phones of anyone in Lebanon. The pagers are given to them. And then what happened yesterday, the walkie-talkies are their emergency communication devices. So it's a strike that was targeted and that, incapacitated Hezbollah's ability to communicate. The communications infrastructure went in the toilet. I was talking to people in Beirut, and there was panic. There was absolute panic in Lebanon, and particularly in Beirut. And so you think about this and you kind of sit back and you say, this is a Jason Bourne movie or Tom Clancy. I mean, intelligence world is generally boring. Most of my career was boring, and then a couple of moments of absolute sheer terror and some excitement. But frankly, this stuff doesn't happen. And so tip of the cap to them. And I'll say one kind of last point on this. The Israelis were rightfully criticized after October 7th. That was a catastrophic intelligence failure. Really more from Shin Bet and IDI, the internal service and Israeli military intelligence. Mossad is generally responsible for Lebanon, Iran, and other places. But they've got their mojo back. This was some badass stuff, and I really tip of the cap to them because I've never seen a kinetic intelligence operation at this scale. If you're a Hezbollah member right now, you understand that Israel has total intelligence dominance over you, and your head is on a swivel. You are terrified. And the psychological warfare aspect of this too. So, I can go on and on, but boy, I was impressed.
Well, first, I do want you to go on and on, but talk to us a little bit because you've carried out ops, you've been involved in ops. Talk to us about the tradecraft that went into this. How complicated was this to pull off? How do you think they did it? I mean, I've seen all sorts of speculation about how they did it, but I mean, you obviously don't have any classified information on it. You're just looking at it as a former operator, but walk us through the tradecraft of how they could have pulled off something so spectacular.
So I know the Israelis, and they operate a little bit differently than us in the sense of, we have many officers who are, in essence, posted overseas. I played a State Department officer many times, stamping visas and doing all sorts of other nonsensical stuff, and I was really bad at it too. But the way the Israelis run operations, they use commercial cover, and their officers are not assigned necessarily to Israeli diplomatic facilities. They might have a declared chief who does liaison, but their clandestine operations are handled by what we would call non-official covered officers. The Russians call illegals, but these are individuals under business cover and often with different passports. And so what the Israelis did here, and my thinking on this, in fact, has evolved really in the last day or so, and I'll tell you why. So at first, I thought they conducted a really brilliant supply chain operation in which they would actually, they certainly find out that Hezbollah needs pagers. Hezbollah switched from cell phones because they were worried about Israeli signals intelligence capabilities. So then they're going to switch to pagers. This is old school stuff like The Wire, probably the best show ever made on TV, by the way. And so then the Israelis figure out how Hezbollah is procuring this, and they get in the middle of this. They create a front. The Israelis would create a front company. We've heard about this company in Taiwan that makes pagers. It was a subsidiary in Hungary. And so I'm thinking, okay, they created a front company, they got in the middle of this, and then when they acquired the pagers, Israeli technical teams and their explosives experts placed small amounts of explosives in them and rigged it, and so a page would trigger the explosives, and then it goes back in, and that makes a lot of sense to me. What I'm thinking about today, though, because now there's this strange Bulgarian angle in Sofia, there's a front company there, that the Israelis might have been the supply chain. In essence, they created a company. They didn't take it, and they actually had Hezbollah contract through them. And so in that way, the Israelis created the actual pager. They didn't have to tinker with it because these companies in Taiwan were saying, we stopped making these models, especially when we're talking about the walkie-talkies. So I love this stuff. I'm going to geek out on the kind of the forensics of this, but this might not be a supply chain operation. They might have been the supply chain. And again, that's where the brilliance of this is. The ability to take a device, put explosives in it, and command detonate it is not difficult. To do it on a scale of 3,000 or 5,000 is.
What is it? You said the Bulgaria angle. What is the Bulgaria angle?
Well, it looks like that might be where the Israelis set up shop. There was an individual. One of the great things in my weird world now that I've kind of come out from under the shadows is I literally had journalists who were calling me. They were in Sofia tracking down the storefront, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, that's what we would do. And everyone's gone, by the way. Nothing exists in any of these places anymore. People there was someone on a Norwegian passport who has now disappeared. I mean, to me, these are the Israeli non-official cover officers. And so the forensics of this are going to be fascinating. But everyone is kind of amazed that you could take a device, rig it with explosives, and command detonate it. That's easy. What is amazing is doing it at the scale of 3,000 and injecting this in the Hezbollah supply chain. And Mark and Danielle, what I thought the other day was, if you're the Hezbollah procurement official who is in charge of this, you're having a very bad day right now.
Honestly, I tell you, I'm torn because watching this, as you say, it is an unbelievable operation. And by the way, an operation that took some time. Their their operational security has been, since October 7th, has been outstanding, both with the Hania assassination, they didn't claim that, but with the Shukr, and the Shukr also was just a very sophisticated, incredible penetration. So why am I torn? I'm torn because I want to laugh at it, which is naughty, maybe a little bit. But I also am looking at Hezbollah in Lebanon. We're talking about a lot of people. Okay, I don't know whether you've watched any of the video.
Yes.
But you see things going off simultaneously from like somebody's, it's not a Ring camera, but the moral equivalent, where there are just a lot of people. Now, a lot of it was centered in Dahiyya. Dahiyya is the southern part of Beirut, which is the headquarters of Hezbollah. But I mean, damn.
Right. This is a denied area. I've actually gone through there, probably not smartly, but I've been to the Dahiyya before for a little drive-by. I think I insisted on going by one time, which probably wasn't.
I've been there too.
But this is a denied area. And so when I say, what does denied area mean? I mean, in intelligence operations, it means it's hard. It means, people are not welcome there. It's tough. And so, there's another point of this too, is that, so October 7th was a failure in human intelligence. It was clear to me that Shin Bet got lazy. The IDI got lazy. They relied too much on sensors, on building this fence. There's all these stories of how the Israelis were using artificial intelligence to monitor Gaza. And they forgot what Shin Bet and Mossad are good at, which is recruiting human sources. Well, these operations that are going on now, and someone called it a cyber operation. It's not a cyber operation. These are human-enabled technical operations with a kinetic side to it. And so that means that the Israelis have so thoroughly penetrated Hezbollah, not from signals intelligence, but from human sources. And with that in mind, think also what's going to happen inside of Hezbollah. They have a pretty legendary counterintelligence unit, and they're going to go on a witch hunt. And if I was the Israelis, if I was back in my old job, we would stir the pot. I mean, you want them totally distracted in a huge counterintelligence investigation. And so, on that note too, again, the paranoia. If you're a Hezbollah member, you don't feel safe anywhere. Not in your apartment, not in your house, not going to the market. All technical devices you're terrified of. You're looking around your corner. You're suspicious of your colleagues. And so there's a brilliance on that as well. Again, because of just the scale of this.
So I think that you make a really important point that I think we don't talk about enough. We have mythologized some of these groups, Hezbollah in particular, because Hezbollah it's not a terrorist group, it's a terrorist army. These are guys who work in military formation. These are guys who fought and are battle hardened from the battles in Syria. They're serious people. At the same time, everybody hates them. I mean, let's be clear. You go to Lebanon, you go to southern Lebanon, and you do not hear a good word. And I mean, that's the thing. People hate them for what they've done to the government. They hate them for the port explosion. They hate them for the Iranian takeover of Lebanon, which they used to think of as a first world country. They hate them because they hate Assad, and they've been propping up, and they hate everybody around them, and they hate the war. So no surprise, you can, with a little do-re-mi, you can start to peel people off to get them to help you out with supply chain or whatever it is. The thing is this a strategic victory or is this a tactical victory?
I thought, the New York Times had a really stupid headline yesterday. And it said,
Shocking.
No,
Well,
you're
I'll
kidding.
tell you, I was on Morning Joe yesterday, but Morning Joe this morning, they were very critical of this headline as well because it said, this was a tactical victory, but is it strategic? And the answer is yes, it is strategic.
Okay, good. So tell us why.
And this is my thinking. And again, my comments on, I try to have kind of emotionless comments. I don't condemn or condone Israeli behavior. I just want people to understand it because I worked with them. And I think that's just, so I'm an explainer of them sometimes just because of my background. And the Israelis are deliberative in their planning. Every one of these operations that I saw them do, they do cost-benefit analysis. They are very honest on cost. If we do X, we might lose an embassy, but we still have to do this. And they present this to the policymakers. So here's my thought on this. Israeli national security doctrine for many years, particularly in Lebanon, has to do with, it's a policy of what you call escalate to de-escalate. They climb this escalatory ladder, and they do so for a reason. And so in a sense now, are we prepping for an Israeli ground invasion in Lebanon? Well, maybe, but not really, because if they would have done that, they would have incapacitated all of Hezbollah's operators, which they did. Then they would have moved. They haven't done that. So what are they doing here? They're sending a message to Nasrallah saying, we know everything about you. We've just knocked out your whole comms infrastructure. And if you go down this road for a wider war, this is what we can do. And so I think there's a strategic value in that. And even today, as you saw the Israelis just pounding southern Lebanon, Nasrallah is giving his speech, and you have, I don't know if it was F-16s or F-35s overflying, Lebanon. This is a message. And so they're climbing the ladder, but it's strategic in saying that, look, we want you to decouple this, this notion that you're protecting the resistance in Gaza. Forget the idea that if there's a ceasefire, then you'll stand down, because we want you to decouple this, because right now you've got to stand down. We have 70,000 people in the north. The Israeli cabinet voted returning the people to the north as a war goal. And look, I talk to Israelis every day, and Gaza is essentially over. The north is what everybody talks about, period. And there's huge support and a huge criticism of the Netanyahu government for not doing enough on the north. So ultimately, I do think this is strategic. Is it going to work? I don't know. Is Nasrallah going to blink? All the conventional wisdom says he doesn't want a wider war. Okay, well, he can stand down, and let's see what happens. The last point on this is, oftentimes you look back at what people have said in the past, and I clearly remember this. Defense Minister Gallant months ago said, we have some things that we can do too. It was this weird statement. I think this is what he was referring to. And I was talking to a former, Unit 8200 member in Israel. That's their Israeli kind of signals intelligence, their cyber capability. And he's not in government anymore, but their view there is, there's probably more that we have up our sleeve. And so the Israelis are telegraphing, this to Hezbollah now. What will happen? I don't know. Because there's a part of this that, look, I remember in 2006, I was in Damascus, and the Israelis didn't do so hot in that war, but they also learned a lot. And so I don't think they're going to make the same kind of mistakes. And so everyone is talking about, the incredible Hezbollah missile arsenal, which is true, with 150,000 missiles. But I think the Israelis can wreak some absolute havoc and some horror on Lebanon as well. And look, the Iranians and Nasrallah know this. I think the ball's in their court right now. So let's see what they do. But there is a strategy to this. I don't think it's tactical. I think it's strategic.
I want to go back at some point to the exquisite carrying out of this, because there's some levels we still haven't explored on it. But just staying on this topic, I read some speculation that they had done this and were going to launch this attack at the start of a war, right? This was going to be the first blow to set before they launched a war in the north, and that some of the Hezbollah people started getting suspicious about the communications devices, and so they decided they had to act. And then there was a discussion within the cabinet, well, do we just launch the war now or not? What do you think of all the speculation on whether it was supposed to be the start of the war?
Right, that's a great question, because, look, just on the face of it, this is an incredible tool, an incredible capability that you would use only when you're about to start the war, to kind of knock out the whole command and control of Hezbollah. So, the notion that there was a potential compromise, and I think the quote was, use it or lose it. I guess so, maybe. I think that I was talking to some folks. No one's been really able to confirm this. Haaretz came out today saying they don't think that's true. And so, in some sense, it doesn't matter. It's over with already. But the idea that you would kind of rush an operation, I'm not sure. I think, I think, again, policymakers have tools in their toolkit, and the intelligence community comes to them. I think the cabinet made a decision to do this period, and they thought it was a good time based on that kind of escalatory ladder. The one thing about the Israeli press, which I love, I'm like one of these weird people who read it all the time, is that the investigative journalists are really good there. So all this stuff will leak. We'll know at one point if it was something that was rushed or not. But at this point, I think that the decision making, even if they said, okay, there was a compromise, the decision making would fall in line of that kind of escalatory move to go forward, and that just makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you about that, actually. I mean, I think when they go in, you're right, they've been under huge pressure. They have, in large part, decimated Hamas. The problem for them is the hostages.
Yes.
And of course, eyes on the north and the displacement from the north is huge pressure. But that's a big operation. And again, for the Israelis, we're talking now about a year in Gaza, right? A call up of unprecedented scale, right? All hands on deck. They let some people go, but we've seen massive hit on their economy, right? And then to go launch immediately into another war is not what they want. The problem for them is these Radwan brigades. So, Mark, you've heard me talk about this, and I know Mark Thiessen. I've got two Marks with a C on my screen here. Mark Thiessen, you've heard me talk about this, but these guys are the Hezbollah equivalent of the Nukhba brigades the Hamas that undertook October 7th. Those are serious guys, okay? And for the Israelis, this means a call up. This means war, and this potentially means major attacks on cities, on civilian areas, which Hezbollah has not ever done with any serious concentration. So, I mean, when you look at it and you assess, what do you think they're thinking about the North? You think they can stare them down?
So I think they're going to make it as this is the reason why they carried out this incredible kinetic operation. I think they're going to try to make it as uncomfortable as possible. Look, the status quo has to change in the North. The U.S. diplomatic efforts are in the toilet. They would never
worthless.
It's worthless, but it could work now. So now is the time to engage because Hezbollah might be forced to come to some kind of agreement. But I go back and forth on this because it's been a year, so the IDF is exhausted. There are not a great many forces in Gaza right now. They certainly need time to kind of rest and recuperate. But Danielle, you're right. I mean, Israeli war doctrine is to fight a war that lasts about a week. I mean, this is a year in Gaza, and now, and if you want to talk about an existential threat, I mean, October 7th was horrific. The Hezbollah is more of an existential threat to Israel than Hamas was. And so this is a really big deal. And, the IDF, if they were going to kind of go at it with Hezbollah, if it's the big one, they got to be ready, and I don't think they are right now. Now, keep in mind, I think there's also the notion of the U.S. intervening, and that's something that is really important. One of the questions, now we're going to go down a crazy road, is, so if the Israelis have escalated right now, if Hezbollah ever did decide to respond and did so with kind of these mass missile attacks, the U.S. is going to have to get involved, period. I mean, that is just unquestionably we have to.
You saw, though, that our second carrier just left.
I mean, and so throw all politics aside, everything. This is the future of Israel. It is existential, and you can criticize Biden all you want on this, but I don't think he wants to be the president to see Israel get destroyed. I mean, he has a history over the years of support to Israel. Can disagree with some of the tactics in terms of what's happening in our support for Gaza, but I don't think any U.S. president wants to go down the road as abandoning Israel in such a time. So perhaps the Israeli thinking is that that U.S. security umbrella is really important now as we head into possible confrontation with Hezbollah. But one of the things, and I, it's a question I would have for you all too. I mean, look, Defense Minister Gallant has been the big hawk on this from the beginning, and so, but what does that really mean? And is there support in Israel itself for a ground invasion, for another security zone in southern Lebanon, or just pounding strikes? Last point on that is the Israeli Air Force could flatten Beirut in several days. And so, they've chosen not to do that as well. So you kind of throw this whole thing into the cauldron. Where does this go? Again, I think it's in Hezbollah's court right now. And of course, it's also with the regime in Iran. Do they want to see their proxy destroyed?
True. Can we geek out a little bit more? We love your strategic analysis, but we also love your tradecraft understanding.
My strategic analysis might be flawed.
No. It's all great. You're one of the most brilliant intelligence minds in this country. But here, what I found fascinating is that it wasn't just the pagers. They gave up their cell phones because they were worried about communication. So they go back to pagers, which is so discreet and exquisite because, everyone's criticizing the Israelis for bombing civilian neighborhoods in Gaza. Here, you're literally targeting terrorists discreetly with, ain't no normal Lebanese using pagers, to communicate with their kids about school lunch and all the rest of that, right? And then so the pagers blow up. So they go even more old school and go back to walkie-talkies. And those
which is
blow up. And
that's the
day.
emergency comms. I mean, no one has a walkie-talkie who's not. I'm talking that is emergency comms for kind of for
How did
Hezbollah
they do
folks.
that? Is it the same company
Yeah.
who produce them, or is there a whole different supply chain?
Whole different companies. This is a Japanese company. They were interviewing them on the funny thing is these companies, the parent companies, are like, this is not good for our brand. I don't think. So they're interviewing in Japan, these companies, and they're all having kind of heart palpitations. But, same type of thing. And so, again, and this is where I talked about deliberative planning, more things up their sleeve. I mean, 48 hours ago, they conduct this op with the pagers, and everyone says, holy crap. And then yesterday, I was actually about to go on air, and they said, hey, there's walkie-talkies blowing up. And I'm laughing. I'm like, this is brilliant. Because, in essence, they knew they would switch to this form of communications. And the last point, so what else is next? I don't know. And
Pigeons.
of course, that's
exploding pigeons.
You saw Mark saw that meme on Instagram.
I
love it.
The pigeons are incredible. So, the fact, again, this is part of a very deliberative covert action plan. Again, I made a statement. I think that the Israelis are teaching us a master class on covert action because it's in several phases. So again, phase 1 was the pagers. Phase 2 is, oh crap, pagers are out of commission. Let's switch to walkie-talkies. And walkie-talkies are blowing up. I mean, unbelievable. But and a totally separate arena. The pagers were from a Taiwanese company. The walkie-talkies, the parent company, was in Japan. How'd they do that? And so that is just extraordinary. And it shows a level of operations that takes months of planning. And it all the other part too is it exposes something that many of us in the intelligence world have worried about for a long time, which is actually supply chains, even our own. So, hey, guess what? U.S. gets a lot of components from other countries too. There's no reason another country can't do this to us. And so, there's a lot of things that kind of go swirling around in your head, but the planning on this was absolutely amazing. And
Mark, you just said something really important,
Yeah.
and I saw this.
She means you.
People.
No.
Yeah, I've never said that to Mark Thiessen before. Oh my God, no. Mark Thiessen knows me well enough to know that I would never say you just said something really important. No, people are talking about this, but at a sort of a lower decibel. This is the argument we have been making for the last 20 years about Huawei, about ZTE, about TikTok, and about everybody else, which is that if you let these guys into your back room, so to speak, whether they're your supplier or they're just building the poles the wires are hanging from, they have an edge on you. And this underscores that all the more. We need to be vigilant about this. That is not what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you an operational.
No, but I agree totally. And I guess, and you're not going to know until it's too late.
Right.
Hezbollah
Exactly.
found out really the hard way.
Exactly. And, I look back on members of Congress and how they fought this fight. And I just think back to all of the people who were like, oh, no, you're just a bigot. You're just don't like the Chinese. It's absolutely appalling. And, of course, we have put them in a position to do something like that to us, a country of 350 million people, not to speak of all the other countries around the world. They still operate in the EU, in Australia, everywhere else. All right, that rant is over. I want to ask you an operational question.
Sure.
So, a lot of the theorizing, well, I'm now turning into Danny Pletka, former journalist, in which I say a lot of the theorizing, but what I really mean is I think.
Some brilliant analysts have speculated.
That's what I meant to say. A
By the way,
brilliant
this is
analyst.
like when you read the Israeli press, when they say a source close to Netanyahu, that's Netanyahu.
Oh, God.
That's
Even in America, that's true.
Or
by
as he
the way.
showed in the video, Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu.
Yes, Exactly. That was very exciting. So, one of the things that I think the Iranians have realized, I just pulled together on our Substack all of the headlines where Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranians vow retaliation for one deed of the Israelis or another. There's just hundreds of these headlines over the years. And the reality is, of course, the Iranians have tried to retaliate against the Israelis not for the Hania assassination, which they said they were going to, but haven't, but for the killing of a couple of senior IRGC people in Syria in April. And that was that massive April 13th barrage of missiles and drones and everything else that was a complete bust. Right? So I think the Iranians have said to themselves, we need to do this differently. We need to do what the Israelis do. We need to find people that we can assassinate. Do you think that's crazy analysis from this brilliant analyst?
So no, I think you're spot on. So look, the Iranian, everyone's focused with the Iranian retaliation on kind of open, overt military strikes, and they certainly tried that. But if you think about Iran and Hezbollah, the real threats is kind of the asymmetric threat. And the fact of the matter is, before Al Qaeda, and we were rightly focused on Al Qaeda, Hezbollah had killed more Americans than any terrorist group. And of course, Iran and her proxies, look what they did to us and our U.S. soldiers in Iraq for years and years. So an extremely capable adversary, not in a necessarily conventional sense, but certainly in that gray zone. And so look what we've seen over the years. And this goes back to, after the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani. So the Iranians have hatched these, assassination plots on numerous former Trump administration officials who now are running around with security details. I keep running into people all over the place. When I go to the airport and I see some dude with the earpiece, I know that, Bolton's traveling or Gina Haspel's traveling or Pompeo's traveling because they have security details in the United States because the Iranians are trying to kill them. That's part of, again, asymmetric warfare. You saw Shin Bet announced about 3 days ago that they had foiled a plot to kill the former Israeli defense minister, and I think that they rolled out, I don't know the equivalent in Israel, the indictment or whatever. They showed this. It's a 73-year-old Israeli guy, maybe not the best asset to recruit, but the Iranians had recruited this guy for such operations. So absolutely, they're going to try to do that, and a dramatic attack would be against a former U.S. official or a U.S. official in the U.S. or an official in Israel. But I worry more about the soft targets, Israeli embassies overseas.
Or Jews.
Or Jews anywhere, absolutely. Which would be, in part, it's part of, Hezbollah's, of course, and Iran's playbook. Think of the attacks back in Argentina in the early 90s. And so ultimately, I think from the counterterrorism perspective, look, I was told by a former FBI agent that the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, that's the entity in every major U.S. city. It's a task force of primarily FBI, but then local law enforcement, CIA, others. Every one of them has been scrubbing their assets on Hezbollah, and that they're pulling special agents in to work on this because there is concern about Hezbollah activating, what they operate very effectively in the United States and in Europe and other places is fundraising. Well, it's really easy to kind of flip that switch. You have a fundraising cell, switch them to become operational. And so in that gray zone, that asymmetric warfare of terrorism, I think there should be some significant concern. I went to a conference last week run by the Soufan Center in New York. It was over the commemoration of 9/11, but it was a conference of primarily FBI. I attended and spoke there, but there was all these talks on terrorist threats. But, the consensus, and of course you heard this from FBI Director Wray, is that the lights are blinking red in terms of threats to the United States. And Iran and her proxies are absolutely key. ISIS is a huge threat as well. But Iran and her proxies, certainly we can see them take action, not only against Israelis, but against Americans. And throw in the scenario, if the U.S. becomes involved in this, then I think you're going to see that even more. But I think, Danielle, your concerns are absolutely valid.
I'm not a fan of Ali Soufan, but that's a conversation for another podcast.
Well, he didn't like the agency for a long time. He's been very critical of some of the things that we've done in the past. So the fact I was invited to talk there, I talked to some of our current agency folks, and they were surprised that I was invited. But it was a great conference, and look, I got a chance to speak with a ton of current FBI officials in senior counterterrorism capacities, and they were worried. It's not just Chris Wray going to talk, to testify in Congress. You talk to the rank and file, you talk to senior FBI special agents or special agents in charge in the field offices. They are very nervous about the threat picture now. And look, there's, as Danielle said, there's 2 U.S. carrier battle groups. There's a nuclear submarine. There's marine and amphibious units on standby. There is a chance that the U.S. gets involved here, and that increases our threat picture dramatically. if that occurs.
Very much so. You've talked a little bit about the psychological impact within Hezbollah of this, because you can't trust, you can't trust your fellow compatriots. You don't know who betrayed you. You don't trust your devices. You don't trust anything, right? What is the impact inside Iran? So, I mean, if you think about right now in Iran, they've got to be thinking, if they did this to Hezbollah, they could be doing it to us. Does my pager work? Does my cell phone work? Danny was telling me the other day that there's video of the Ayatollah Khamenei at an event, and he keeps looking up at the sky. It's the Israelis have gotten into their heads. They were able to penetrate and take out the leader of Hamas right after his meeting with the supreme leader of Iran. I mean, what is the psychological impact of this inside Iran?
So, Mark, that's a great question, and it reminds me, as I have all my notes for all my TV hits and stuff like that. When I was talking about the effect on Hezbollah, I wrote a note to myself. I should talk about Iran as well. So it's perfect here because I think it's the same. Again, we talk about denied area operations. That's my role at CIA. These are hard. These are countries with really reputable counterintelligence apparatuses. But Israel is showing that they can operate both in Lebanon and Iran almost with impunity. I mean, it's extraordinary. And so, and this is not just killing Hania. It's, remember the Israelis killed the lead Iranian nuclear scientist with this psychotic, automated machine gun a couple years ago. And so, their reach into these areas is extensive. And, I couldn't help as I'm watching this thinking of that TV show Tehran. I don't know if you all
it was great.
saw that.
Fantastic.
And again, but Israel has the ability to penetrate through a variety of means, their adversaries. And certainly in Iran, I think the Israelis operate much more freely in Iran than, for example, Western intelligence does. And, because they have the ability to recruit, use networks of different ethnic groups to go in there. I remember, I got to be careful when I say this. I would say that the Israelis have an extensive presence in northern Iraq, in Kurdistan.
Very, very.
Why is that? Are they worried about, the Iraqi government? No. It's a window and it's a route right into Iran. And so.
And Turkey.
And Turkey and Turkey as well. Actually, I think I'm going to digress. I think Turkey's probably a harder environment for the Israelis than Iran is.
I agree.
And so, but I think all of this is a message to the Iranians as well, 100%. That that Israeli intelligence is back, and their ability to operate in these areas is absolutely remarkable. And I think that a lot of these messages we talk about that Hezbollah received, that the Iranians received as well.
Incredible.
Amazing.
I mean, the whole thing is.
It's out of a movie. Are we watching like Jason Bourne or Tom Clancy books?
They'll make a movie.
Mission Impossible.
I woke up at 2:30 the other morning. I was thinking about this. It is, you don't want to. I try not to talk in. I'm Greek, so I can't help it with too much hyperbole. But when I say it's the most incredible kinetic intelligence operation, I said that I was like, oh crap. And then I called all my old friends from the agency. I'm like, am I off? They said no. Everyone had said the same thing. And you saw former agency directors saying this. It's on such kind of a vast scale. And look, the intelligence world has done really impressive things over the years. Someone came back to me and said, what about the Stuxnet operation? And I said, well, that wasn't kinetic. Of course that was incredible, but this is maiming. Well, there's one other part of this. It's maiming and taking out 3,000 operatives. One thing to note on this, and I got myself in trouble. My wife was mad at me again. So, Tom Rogan of the Washington Examiner called me up and he said, hey, you want to comment on this? And I said, yeah, I'm happy because the Israelis kind of blew the nuts off of all the Hezbollah guys. And he said, can I quote you? I said, sure. It was in his column. So I said, I'm happy that their nuts got blown off. And my wife was like, come on, could you please try to be professional? I said, well, I don't know.
Took the ball out of Hezbollah.
But I raised that.
I've seen so many memes.
That's so good. But I raised that because there's a part of this, the memes are good, but the brutality of this. I mean, they know you take a pager, where is it? Well, you're going to look at it. You're also going to put it down your pants. And the Israelis, again, I think this is calculated to cause kind of grotesque injury as well. And that strikes absolute fear into Hezbollah. So there's a part of this which is pretty gruesome. One of the things that I'm going to digress again on this, when we run our kinetic operations, and I mean this, and I will tell you this, under legal framework, you want to actually kill the adversary. Wounding someone and then letting them kind of writhe in pain. If you see this and you see, kinetic strikes by the US military, for example, I'll leave it at that, you want to take people off the battlefield, period. The Israelis didn't want to do this here. They wanted to maim some people. And what does that do? It actually strikes fear. It also causes 3,000 people to get health care. it paralyzes the entire Lebanese, health system. I mean, this is what the operational thinking was. So again, I'm sounding a little gruesome here, but there's some logic to this.
One other Jason Bourne type question: how does this help them map out the Hezbollah network?
Good question. I wanted to ask that too.
Because that was another fascinating part about this, because these things go off and then people come to them and people take care of them and people take them to the hospital and people come visit them, and like the Israelis are watching all this. I mean, are they collecting data and mapping out the Hezbollah network through this?
Yeah, and so they certainly are. I mean, you'll see, they would have the ability, I would imagine, to see kind of the roles at the different hospitals that are coming in. But they'll have what you call, an organizational chart, an order of battle. And so 100%. One of the things that we haven't seen yet is how many actual operatives were taken off the battlefield. Look, Hezbollah is a terrorist group, so I'm not distinguishing in terms of the justness of it, but administrative and logistic types are a little bit different in terms of fighting prowess than the operational members. So I think the Israelis will probably try to assess on the level of damage. Logistics wins wars, so it's good taking out logistics members, but the actual hardcore operators as well, they're going to want to see that. But yeah, sure, there's incredible collection opportunities as well. And then there's going to be even more because the chatter that happens after this, and not necessarily even from signals intelligence, but from their human sources on the ground, everybody's going to be talking about who was killed and injured. So I do agree. I want to tell you all a story because I'm going to play producer for a second, because I want to go the psychological aspect of this, because I think what Israel has done after 10/7 shattered the Israeli psyche in terms of the kind of the all-powerful Mossad, the all-powerful IDF. So it wasn't only inside the Israeli government where people were like, holy crap, this is the Israeli people. And I think that really matters. But I think Israel has restored that notion of dominance in terms of both the intelligence and the military sphere, but instilled fear. And I'm sorry, in the Middle East, that's what matters, period. Your adversaries have to fear you. And I'm going to tell you a funny story. So I was in Damascus in 2006. I went to Libyan National Day. So the U.S. Embassy gets an invite. We had restored relations with the Libyans. I'd actually gone to Libya earlier and was one of our acting chiefs there when we just opened up the shop in Tripoli, which was really weird and a whole other story. But so I was invited, and of course I decided to go. And so the Libyan ambassador greets me, knows who I am, and he says, Marc, I'm glad you came today. And I said, well, sure, all blah, blah. We're restoring relations. We have counterterrorism cooperation. This is great. And he said, well, no, there's two people at this event. It's a National Day event who are really happy you're here. And I said, who? And he said, well, it's Khalid Mishal and Ahmed Jibril. Khalid Mishal being one of the leaders of Hamas, and Ahmed Jibril, the leaders of one of the most, passed away now, the leaders of one of the most notorious terrorist groups who killed a lot of Americans. The
Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Right. And I'm smiling at him. First of all, I'm thinking like, I'm going to write a freaking great cable when I come back from this, because this is what a unique opportunity. But I said to him, that's pretty funny. And the Libyan ambassador says, no, we're serious. Like, we actually think that your presence here will stop the Israelis from doing anything against this event. And, so this is kind of a funny story, but actually it shows what that fear factor matters. And the Israelis lost that after October 7th. And that is enormously damaging. And they got it back now. And, again, it's a small country in a really tough neighborhood. You have to have that. And I think they got it back. But that story and I'm sure I wrote a great cable on it. And I remember thinking like, they would not talk to me. They kept me away from them. But come on, that was
Did you raise
crazy,
a glass?
crazy.
Did you give him a wink and a?
I was serving in Amman, Jordan. I got another funny story. This is my value is telling stories. But I was in Amman, Jordan in the late '90s, and you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm playing street hockey with the Canadian Embassy. Marc, you'll understand this. I got all the Marines together, and I said we have to kick the shit out of the Canadians. And it was a war. This was it was a bloodbath. And Mike Tapazzini, he's dropped his cover, but he was the Canadian intel chief there, and so I can say his name. And he gets a phone call and he said, I got to go downtown. Like, there's a whole bunch of Canadians who were just arrested for, I think, trying to kill someone. And they squirted some poison in some guy's ear. And they say they're Canadians, but they don't speak English. Well, this was the Mossad op trying to kill Khalid Mishal. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And so later that night, I see Mike at a reception, and he said, you'll never believe this. Like, I go down there, these guys say they're Canadians, they have Canadian passports, they can't speak English. And then he said it was obviously with the Israelis, and a big stink ensued. And if you remember, King Hussein demanded that Netanyahu give the antidote.
And he did.
So that's my, my weird kind of experiences with Khalid Mishal and Jordan and Syria. And, hey, look.
May they all rot in hell.
The first sat at CIA was the Hamas desk in 1997 in Counterterrorism Center, which of course doesn't exist anymore. Well, I think it's probably exists now, but it went away.
Mark, you are a treat to have on, and by that I don't mean Mark Thiessen. Greek Mark, you are a treat to have on. Thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I hope you'll come back.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I love telling stories and appreciate the time together.
Good. Well, Mark and I will have you for drinks, and we'll really tell stories.
Let me know where I can pre-order your memoir when it comes out.
Oh, jeez.
First of all, let me just say Marc is totally awesome. And as soon as he hung up, I was kicking myself for forgetting to ask how he's doing, because he's also a victim of Havana syndrome, where, just as he's been carrying out these kinds of operations against our adversaries, he's also had operations carried out against him. And he seems to be doing great, which is awesome. So Marc, if you're listening, sorry for not asking. I hope you're doing great. I just think his last point about the psychological effect of this is on Israel. Because we talked about the psychological effect on Hezbollah. We've talked about the psychological effect on Iran. The psychological effect in Israel. Israel is back. This was, October 7th was a huge intelligence failure. It pierced the perception of Israel's inviolability, right? Their intelligence was so good and omniscient and omnipotent almost, and they've got their mojo back. And this not only do they have their mojo back, they have upped their game. And I understand these are different agencies within Israel, but Israel is operating at peak level when it comes to intelligence operations. If you're sitting in Tehran, if you're sitting in Lebanon right now, you're thinking, I'm not sure I want to mess with these people. And
well, I hope that's
what they're thinking.
I have to say, Mark, when I hear you say that, their mojo is back, it is at such a terrible price. You want them to do well against their adversaries. You want them to crush the terrorists. You want them to stand up to them. But when I think back and to what happened, Mark said it right. This was an epic intelligence failure. I mean, this was an intelligence failure worse than 9/11 in terms of, the proportional numbers. We're talking about if more than 35,000 Americans had been killed on 9/11. This was just such a giant fail. And, while I absolutely admire them for turning this around, you can't get those 1,200 lives back. You can't get those hostages back, and they still haven't got them all back. It's depressing as hell. And the one thing that does make me sad about all of this is while we're all dancing our little hora around the mutilated pants of a whole variety of terrorists, those facts remain. Those hostages are still being held. It's just a terrible thing. These people, these terrorist organizations, I don't know how we have so lost the plot in the United States. I don't know how our media has so lost the plot. These are the worst people in the world.
100%. And you've got kids on college campuses waving Hezbollah flags, waving Hamas flags, dressing, with keffiyehs and literally supporting terrorism. So, we didn't have that after 9/11. I will tell you that. But, 9/11 was an intelligence failure of epic proportions as well. We just marked the anniversary of 9/11. And I'll tell you, every time I look at the videos of that, I made the mistake of watching on Fox in the morning. They do every year, they go back to the press coverage of that day, and watching the people falling from the building and watching the buildings collapse. And I just, I break down every time. So I understand how people in Israel feel. But you know what? The one thing that Israel's done is what we did after 9/11 is you get hit, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you go back and get those people. That's what they're doing.
Blow them up in their pants.
And you blow them up in their pants. Amen. Enjoy those 72 virgins without your equipment.
Without your equipment. I saw somebody else. Enjoy the Grim Beeper.
Grim Beeper. That is awesome. All right.
It is indeed. Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves.
See you next week. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Marc Thiessen. That's Marc with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.